The eternal front had calcified into a fact of existence, like gravity or entropy. Maps no longer bothered to mark it. School children drew it as a thick red line across the galaxy's sleeve and moved on to recess. 832 standard years had passed since either side managed to hold a planet for more than a month. The war had become a liturgy: launch the fleet, sing the dirge, recycle the wreckage, repeat. Both sides had perfected the art of dying in place. Kyle 9 was simply next in the hymn. The planet had once been beautiful: 3 violet oceans, forests of glass trees that sang when the wind passed through them, a sky the color of bruised dawn. Now it was a scab. Swarm biofleets had stripped the oceans to slurry, melted the glass forests into feeding cauldrons, turned the sky the color of infection. The last coalition stronghold clung to the highest plateau like a barnacle, its void shields flickering on fumes, its defenders down to sidearms, and prayers in 17 dead languages. They had 12 hours of reactor life left. They had 6 hours of ammunition. They had 0 miracles. At our 11:53, every sensor on the planet went blind at once. Not jammed, not overloaded, blind, as though light itself had been asked to look away. Auspex officers tore off their headsets and screamed. Shield technicians watched their boards flatline and began laughing in the hysterical way people laugh when the firing squad misses on purpose. Then the sky tore, not with thunder or fire, but with silence so complete it had weight. 11 wedges of matte black metal simply existed where vacuum had been a heartbeat earlier. They were enormous, each longer than most cities, edges beveled like obsidian axes, surfaces scarred by impacts that predated the coalition by geological epochs, no running lights, no transponders, no heat bloom. They cast shadows sharp enough to cut flesh. They fell, not in orbit, not in formation. They fell like stones dropped by a bored god, punching through atmosphere without friction, without sonic booms, without even the courtesy of burning. The air simply parted, whimpering. On the fortress walls, a young Dravoxy gunner named Kreshva forgot how to breathe. She had been born on this plateau, had watched her clutch mates digested by swarm acid, had sworn she would die here with her claws on a trigger. Now she watched black mountains descend and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not fear, not hope, something older. The first wedge kissed the ground 200 kilometers east of the fortress. The impact should have registered as a magnitude 12 quake. Instead, the planet merely sighed the way a tired animal sighs when the butcher finally arrives. Its belly open. They came out walking. No drop pods. No repulsors. No ceremony. Just boots on ramp, ramp on dirt, the way infantry had disembarked since infantry was invented. The first figure was a woman, maybe 30 Terran years, armor the color of arterial blood long dried. Her helmet hung from one thumb. Her hair was cropped short, the sides shaved into ritual scars that spelled something in a language no translator knew. She carried a rifle that looked like a child's toy, short barrel, wooden stock, iron sights older than spaceflight. She was chewing something. She looked bored. Behind her came the rest. 10,000 at first, then 50, then 100,000, pouring out of 11 bellies like black sand. They landed wherever they chose, some on the plateau, some on the glass plains, some directly on the carcasses of swarm megafauna that had been dead for weeks. They landed on their feet every time, knees bending to absorb impacts that should have powdered bone. Helmets came off. Cigarettes were lit. Someone started singing in a minor key that made the Fortress Auspex officers weep without knowing why. A man with a sergeant's chevrons shaved with a bayonet, while standing on the lip of a ramp 2 kilometers up. Another offered a flask to a coalition Marine who had come out to stare. The Marine took it, drank, and forgot his own name for 6 beautiful seconds. The swarm felt the new weight on the planet and reacted the way it always reacted. It attacked. From every horizon, the tide came. Not ships this time. Ships were too slow. Living waves of chitin and acid and hunger. Billions of organisms knitted into a single moving crust. The ground itself seemed to flow toward the intruders. A black red sea under a sky the color of rotting fruit. The woman with the scarred scalp watched it come. She finished chewing, spat a seed into the dust, and raised her tiny rifle one-handed. The motion was lazy, almost insulting. She fired. There was almost no sound. A soft metallic cough, the kind a weapon makes when it is too old to bother with trauma. 20 kilometers of swarm simply ceased. Not exploded, not burned, not pushed aside, ceased. A perfect rectangular corridor carved out of reality. Edges glowing faintly like heated glass. Floor polished to a mirror that reflected a sky that was no longer there. Wind rushed into the vacuum and froze into scarlet snow that hung motionless, too shocked to fall. The swarm flowed around the impossible canyon and kept coming, because the swarm had never learned the word stop. The woman worked the bolt on her antique rifle. Manual, deliberate, the sound of metal on metal, loud in the sudden hush, and spoke without turning. First rank, advance 10 paces. Second rank, kneel and brace. Third rank, hold fire until you see the color of their fear. 500,000 humans moved as one organism. Boots struck glass in perfect unison, a drumbeat the planet felt in its bones. Rifles came up, everyone different, everyone ancient, everyone lovingly maintained. Some were wood and iron. Some were metaceramic and coiled magnetic rails. All of them looked embarrassed to be pointed at something so numerous. The swarm hit the line at 400 kilometers per hour. The line did not move. 500,000 fingers tightened. The planet forgot how to turn. For 3 full seconds, Kyle 9 hung suspended between heartbeats. The sun froze above the horizon. Clouds stopped mid-boiling. A drop of acid ejected from a swarm assassin beetle hung in the air like a ruby ornament. Then sound returned all at once. Not explosions, not the scream of plasma or the roar of railguns. Just the polite, methodical crack, crack, crack of 500,000 rifles speaking in overlapping sequence, the way rain speaks when it has all day. The swarm's front disintegrated, not fell back, not died, disintegrated, as though every round carried the memory of extinction and was eager to share it. The mirror floor of the canyon extended itself, kilometer after kilometer, until it reached the horizon and kept going. Above, the sky filled with molten rain. 40,000 bio-dreadnoughts that had been preparing orbital bombardment simply came apart in low orbit. Their biomass flash boiled into glittering clouds that caught the frozen sun and threw it back as auroras of violet and blood. When the echo of the last shot faded, the plain was empty except for humans and glass. The woman with the scarred scalp lowered her smoking rifle, worked the bolt once more out of habit, and keyed an open channel on the Coalition emergency band. Fortress Kyle 9. This is Sergeant Mira Calhoun, 3 Ard Terran Irregulars. Your dance card's clear. You can stop praying now. She paused, listening to the sound of 10,000 veterans trying not to cry over an open mic. We'll take the tab, she added gently. Beers on you next time. Behind her, the black wedges rose silently into the sky they had never asked permission to enter, bellies already closing like the jaws of something that had finished its meal and remembered manners. On the fortress walls, Kreshva dropped her rifle and sat down hard in the dust. She was laughing, or crying. She no longer knew the difference. Across the plateau, humans began digging fire pits with entrenching tools older than the war. Someone produced a battered harmonica. Someone else started brewing coffee that smelled like burnt earth and home. The war had been going on for 832 years. On Kyle 9, in the space of one afternoon, it learned a new word. The Coalition High Command watched the aftermath on Kyle 9 from a war room 300 light-years away and forgot how to speak. Every holotable showed the same impossible truth, a continent-sized mirror where the swarm's primary assault vector had been, edges still glowing soft cherry red, reflecting stars that weren't in the sky anymore. 40,000 biodreadnoughts, reduced to glittering particulate drifting in the stratosphere like crimson snow. And in the center of it all, 500,000 soft-skinned bipeds sitting around campfires, passing flasks singing something low and mournful in a language the translators rendered as lies of the field, 14th century Terran folk tradition. Admiral Vale Thayan, highest-ranked Dravoxy in the fleet and veteran of 411 planetary sieges, felt his primary heart stutter. He had seen worlds die. He had ordered worlds to die. He had never seen a world politely asked to live and obeyed so quickly. He slammed every emergency channel open at once. Unknown forces on Kyle 9, identify yourselves. State allegiance, chain of command, and terms of engagement. Static answered. Then a single, low-band image packet, unencrypted, pushed through every receiver with the lazy confidence of a thrown stone. It was a photograph, grainy, high contrast, clearly centuries old, of a two-legged figure in primitive armor, extending the middle digit of its right hand. Beneath it, block letters in Coalition Standard, WORKING. The war room lights flickered as every tactical AI simultaneously blue-screened, trying to parse the insult. On the surface of Kyle 9, Sergeant Mira Calhoun accepted a tin cup of coffee from a private whose armor still steamed from re-entry. She tasted it, grimaced, and handed it back. Needs more apocalypse, she said. The private grinned and produced a flask of something that smelled like distilled regret. Mira took a pull, nodded approval, and looked up at the fortress walls where the defenders were finally emerging. Shell-shocked, wide-eyed, some still clutching rifles they had forgotten to fire. A young Dravoxy officer approached at a cautious trot, all 8 legs trembling. His translator bead stuttered. You are human. Mira considered him the way a cat considers a particularly interesting mouse. That's what the birth certificate says. The officer swallowed. High Command demands. High Command can wait its turn, Mira interrupted gently. Right now, the grown-ups are busy. She turned away, keyed a throat-mic that shouldn't have worked across planetary distances without a relay. Calhoun, to all units. Status check. Replies rolled in like lazy thunder. 3rd Battalion's got a beachhead on the southern glass. Found a swarm queen. She's crying. Wants to speak to the manager. 5th Heavy says the local gravity's drunk. They're playing football with a dreadnought carcass. Medical reports, 0 fatalities. Some bruised egos and one guy stubbed his toe on a continent. Mira snorted. Copy all. Hold what you've taken. Dig in. Nobody gets heroic until I've had second coffee. She clicked off, looked back at the Dravoxy officer still standing there. Tell your high command, we're not mercenaries. We're not allies. We're not enemies. She took another pull from the flask. We're the bill coming due. Far above, the black wedges had not left. They simply climbed until they were invisible specks against the stars, then stopped, hanging in geostationary orbit like judges who had already reached a verdict, but were willing to hear closing arguments. On Vera 4, the story grew colder. The moon was a tombstone orbiting a dead gas giant, its surface etched with acid scars deep enough to hide fleets. The swarm had hollowed it out centuries ago, turning the entire satellite into a single living organism, tunnels of bone and chitin threading mantle to core. A hive mind so dense its thoughts bent light. Coalition long-range scans had written the place off as unassailable. 3 human ships arrived without ceremony. They were needles, sleek, knife-thin, no bigger than heavy cruisers. They parked in high orbit, opened one hatch each, and stepped out into vacuum. No suits, no magnetic boots, no visible propulsion. Just 3,000 humans in standard combat armor walking down the gravity well like it was a Sunday stroll. Swarm interceptors rose in perfect synchronization, 10,000 living missiles, each the size of a destroyer, spitting plasma lances hot enough to boil steel. The humans wave. The first lance hit a woman in the front rank square in the chest. Her armor flashed white-hot, peeled away in molten strips. Blood flash froze into rubies that orbited her like a halo. She kept walking. Another lance took her left arm off at the shoulder. She switched her rifle to the remaining hand and kept walking. By the time their boots touched regolith, half were naked to the waist, skin blistered black by radiation, eyes ruptured from vacuum, lungs frothing with ice. None had fallen. The hive fortress reacted by surfacing, a mountain of living armor and teeth erupting from the crust. Big enough to eclipse the sun, it opened a maw the size of a continent and screamed a challenge in frequencies that shattered stone. The lead human, a man missing everything below the waist, being carried by 2 comrades who were themselves missing pieces, looked up, sighed the sigh of a parent whose toddler had just discovered swearing, and unslung what looked like a length of plumbing pipe sealed with duct tape. He twisted the end cap. The moon split, cleanly, quietly. 2 perfect hemispheres drifting apart on molten tides, exposing the glowing core like a heart-surprised mid-beat. Between them floated the human formation, steam gently venting from ruptured lungs, blood crystallizing into scarlet snowflakes that caught the light of the dying star and threw it back as roses. One of them, a woman with half her face burned away, keyed a throat mic that still worked somehow. Vera 4 secured. Send beer, and a medic who isn't squeamish. Then they sat down on nothing, legs dangling over the glowing wound in the moon, and waited for extraction the way other people wait for a bus. Coalition analysts stopped trying to file reports. They simply changed the system designation to HUMANDONOT, a PPROA, CH, and scheduled therapy for the entire department. Across the front, the impossible became routine. Humans walked through minefields that rewrote themselves to avoid their boots. They boarded swarm hive ships with nothing but knives and bad language. They turned planetary siege guns into barbecues and invited the former gunners to dinner. And always the same calm, tired eyes. Always the same refusal to explain. The galaxy had claimed humans were myths. The battlefield, polite as ever, corrected the record. The swarm had never known hesitation. Hunger was its scripture, consumption its prayer. For 1 billion years, it had moved across the galaxy like a tide that only knew forward. Retreat was not merely impossible. It was semantically meaningless. A swarm fleet did not flee. It reconfigured. It adapted. It devoured itself to birth something larger. Then it met the humans, and for the first time, the tide discovered the concept of a cliff. It began with small things. A brood world on the edge of the Dravoxy Rift suddenly went dark. No distress, pheromone, no psychic death scream. When a scout tendril arrived, it found the planet cracked open like a nut. The entire biomass neatly scooped out and arranged on the night side in the shape of a perfect human handprint visible from orbit. The handprint was 8,000 kilometers across. Something had written NICETRY in letters deep enough to hold oceans. Another hive fleet, 2 million vessels, vanished while transiting the Vera Nebula. The only trace was a single human corvette drifting through the wreckage, hull scorched black, broadcasting an old Terran song on repeat, a woman's voice singing about whiskey and regret. When the swarm tried to board, the corvette accelerated to 0.87 and rammed the flagship. Both ships ceased to exist. The song kept playing for 3 more days, carried by debris that refused to decay. The hive minds began dreaming, something they had never done before. In the dreams they saw soft pink things that bled and laughed and refused to die. The dreams always ended the same way. A human woman with ritual scars on her scalp, looking straight into the shared consciousness and mouthing 4 words they could not forget. Not your turn yet. Panic is not a swarm emotion, but something close to it began to propagate through the neural lattices. Queens devoured their own spawn to buy processing time. Entire sectors were abandoned overnight, biomass simply unmade and scattered into the void to deny the humans fuel. For the first time in recorded history, the swarm's expansion curve went negative. They tried to negotiate. Every frequency, every psychic band, every gravitic pulse was flooded with the same offer. Take whatever you want. Name any price. Only stop. Whole spiral arms were offered gift-wrapped. Immortality serums distilled from 1,000 species. The location of the progenitor vaults that predated the stars themselves. Anything. The reply came from a single human private sitting on the shattered spine of a planetary-scale bio-titan. The titan was still twitching, acid blood-eating craters the size of cities, but the private didn't seem to mind. He was cleaning his rifle with a strip torn from the titan's neural banner, humming under his breath. A swarm recording drone, brave or stupid, hovered close enough to catch his face. He looked up, wiped green blood from his cheek, and spoke directly into the lens in perfect swarm harmonic, the dialect used only by the oldest queens. Not your turn yet. Then he went back to humming. The transmission was broadcast to every hive mind simultaneously. Queens across 1,000 light-years felt something rupture inside their reproductive chambers. Several simply stopped laying and died on the spot. Coalition High Command watched the enemy collapse and felt no triumph, only the cold certainty that whatever came next would not be victory. It would be accounting. On the former front, Worlds that had burned for centuries suddenly found themselves silent. Birds returned to skies that had forgotten wings. Children played in craters that still glowed faintly at night. Human ships gathered above the graveyard like crows that had already eaten their fill. They did not land. They did not claim territory. They simply waited until every surviving sensor, every trembling survivor, every ancient AI that had watched the war since its infancy was paying attention. Then they left. One by one, the black wedges rose through atmospheres without friction, slipped past orbital defenses that forgot to fire, and vanished the way nightmares vanish at dawn. No flare, no wake. Only one ship remained, a needle scarred by 1,000 battles, its hull patched with plates torn from swarm dreadnoughts and painted with crude white letters, STILMD. It broadcast on an open channel every species could hear. Sergeant Mira Calhoun's voice, older now, rough with smoke and too many nights without sleep. "We were never myths," she said. "We were just sleeping." A pause. Somewhere behind her, someone laughed, soft and fond and very tired. "Try not to wake us again." The needle turned its prow toward the deep black, accelerated to a speed that should have torn it apart, and was gone. The war did not end with trumpets or treaties. It ended with silence so complete that veterans woke screaming because they could hear their own hearts again. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the black ships drifted on, engines cold, weapons warm, crews dreaming of home and coffee and the next good fight. Sleeping, waiting, not gone, just bored again. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of a courtroom after the verdict has been read, but before anyone dares to breathe. 100,000 worlds held perfectly still, waiting for the gavel that never quite fell. Coalition senators argued for weeks about whether to declare victory. They drafted proclamations, minted medals, scheduled parades. Every draft was quietly deleted within hours. No one could explain why, only that the words felt obscene. The medals were melted down. The parade routes were turned into community gardens. Children planted flowers in soil that still steamed faintly at night. On former swarm worlds, something stranger happened. The biomass did not rot. It crystallized. Entire continents of chitin and flesh hardened into black glass that reflected starlight like obsidian mirrors. Explorers who landed, against every warning, found the glass warm to the touch and etched with tiny, perfect letters in languages no one recognized. When read aloud, the letters sounded like lullabies. The explorers came home weeping and refused to speak of what they had seen. Years passed, then decades. The galaxy learned to live with the hole the humans had left. Trade routes reopened. Children were born who had never seen a bio-dreadnought. Old veterans died quietly in their beds, dreaming of soft faces and tiny rifles, and a woman finishing an apple, while reality politely stepped aside. Then the messages began. Not transmissions, messages. A freighter captain in the Perseus Drift woke to find his cargo hold rearranged into a perfect sculpture of his childhood home, built from ration packs and spare parts. The sculpture was warm. A note taped to the front door read in his own handwriting, "You left the stove on in 73. Fixed it." On a Dravoxy monastery world, the meditation crystals, ancient, sacred, untouched for millennia, rearranged themselves overnight into a single sentence visible from orbit. Still proud of you, Kresh. Kreshva, now old, her claws dulled by peace, her scars turned silver, stood on the observatory balcony and cried for the first time since Kyle 9. She knew that handwriting. It belonged to the human who had handed her a flask the day the war forgot how to end. A swarm remnant, one of the few queens who had survived by hiding in the gravity well of a black hole, received a visitor. No ship, no warning, just a human woman sitting cross-legged on the event horizon, drinking coffee from a tin cup. The queen's entire hive mind went quiet out of respect. The woman finished her coffee, tossed the cup into the accretion disk, where it orbited perfectly for 300 years, and said, "You kept the kids safe. Good job." Then she was gone. The queen spent the rest of her existence teaching her spawn that some things were more important than hunger. Centuries rolled on. The galaxy grew old and fat, and mostly kind. War still happened. Small ones, stupid ones, but never again on the scale that had scarred 3 galactic arms. Whenever someone started building something too big, too hungry, too certain of its right to consume, strange things happened. A warlord's planet cracker would find its firing mechanism replaced with a single red apple. A dictator's palace would wake to find every mirror showing the same image. A human sergeant with ritual scars, cleaning her rifle, looking mildly disappointed. A fleet on the verge of genocide would look out its viewports and see 11 black wedges hanging in space where no sensors had detected them, silent as judgment. The fleet would power down its weapons and go home. No one ever saw the humans again, but everyone knew they were there, watching, waiting, not angry, not even particularly interested, just making sure the galaxy remembered how to be small. And on certain nights, across certain battlefields that never quite cooled, old soldiers, coalition, swarm, neutral, it didn't matter, would wake from dreams of soft faces and tiny rifles, and a woman with scarred scalp who smiled like the end of the world was a private joke. They would sit in the dark and whisper the only prayer anyone still believed in. Please, let us be good, because the myths were real, and they had never actually left. They were just giving us one more chance to get it right. The galaxy aged gently after that. Stars burned lower. Empires rose, flowered, and crumbled into quiet republics that argued over water rights instead of annihilation. Children learned the eternal front, the way earlier children had learned about dragons. A scary story with a moral at the end. Museums displayed fragments of swarm chitin next to rusted human bayonets, both labeled the same way, DONOTTOUCH. THEYSTILLWTCH. Every few centuries, a new generation decided the warnings were metaphor, that the humans had died out or ascended or simply lost interest. They built bigger engines, sharper claws, hungrier dreams. They always lasted exactly long enough to finish the first test firing. Then the sky would open again, quietly, politely, the way a parent opens a bedroom door at 3 a.m. to check if the kids are asleep. 11 black wedges. Or 3 needles. Sometimes just one scarred Corvette with fresh paint that read STILMAD in childish letters. They never spoke on open channels anymore. They didn't need to. A single apple would appear on the bridge of the flagship, warm, smelling of autumn on a world no one had visited in 1,000 years. A tin cup of coffee would materialize on the warlord's desk, half drunk, lipstick on the rim that belonged to no species anyone recognized. a note in handwriting that made admirals weep without knowing why. "We're not angry, just disappointed." The engines would power down. The fleet would turn around. The war would end before it began. No shots fired, no blood spilled, just the soft, inevitable sound of a galaxy remembering how to behave. In the deep black between galaxies, far from any star's light, the humans waited. Their ships drifted in loose formation, running lights dimmed to embers, crews rotating through centuries-long naps. They played cards with decks older than most civilizations. They brewed coffee that tasted like home and argued over whose turn it was to fix the gravity plating. They told the same stories over and over. Kyle 9, Vera 4, the queen who learned mercy, the warlord who cried when he found the apple. Sergeant Mira Calhoun, promoted so many times the rank no longer fit on her armor, sat on the hull of the lead wedge sometimes, legs dangling over the edge of everything, staring at the faint glow of the Milky Way like a woman watching her children from the porch long after bedtime. She still had the same scars on her scalp. They had gone silver centuries ago. Every few hundred years she would key the all-hands channel and say the same 6 words. Voice soft, almost shy, still proud of them, mostly. Then she would go back inside, brew another pot of coffee that tasted like burnt earth and forgiveness, and wait for the next time someone forgot the rules. Because the myths were never myths. They were the galaxy's immune system, and antibodies don't negotiate with infection. They just remember your name.